Boy, doesn't a bucket of chicken sound good right now? This is Tony Cook, the co-editor of HO Collector Magazine. If you're enjoying this NMRAx presentation, remember to subscribe to the channel and click the little bell icon, and then you'll receive updates whenever there's new content out. Thanks for viewing.
I'll be right with you guys. Just give me a second here. I'm holding for Sir Rod Stewart. Yeah, he's a little annoyed because every time we do a show, he's always last on. He never gets on. But if you guys have been watching the NMRAx, I would strongly suggest that you sub to it, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you'll always know when it's on. And it's a great show. Hold on. Yeah, I'm holding for Sir Rod Stewart. Yes. Yeah. Hi, Rod. How are you? Bill Graham from MRL, Model Railroading Live. Guys, remember NMRX. Yeah, I'm talking about the NMRX, Rod. Yeah, you watch it too, Rod. So Rod Stewart watches it as well. Hey, Rod, listen. Let me just finish this up, and I'll get back to you. Okay? Yeah, I'm not going to cut you off. I know I hung up the last time. That was not my fault. Relax, just relax. Okay, Rod. I'll be with. I tell you, these superstars. Get the guys model railroading. Hey, NMRAX, sub, like, and hit the notification button. Okay? Okay.
Hey, Marty. Marty. The camera's still on. It's still rolling. Don't go get a sandwich now. It's still rolling. Marty's gone down to the beach. Marty lives like 30 feet from the beach. Marty is like loaded with coin. You see, when Marty's not on camera, this is what he's doing. He's always doing this. Anyways, the guys at NMRAx, NMRAx, you got your Marty Jenkins, you got your Gordy Robinson, who's now the president of the NMRA, you got your Speed Muller, you got your Brad Anderson. If I'm missing somebody, I apologize, but those are the names Marty told me to mention. So anyways, these guys work really hard on these videos and getting them out, and the clinicians work really hard. So if you're enjoying it, apparently, according to Tony Cook, I watched his promos, and apparently what you do is you click on you subscribe, like you're getting a magazine, and then you click on the little bell icon. And then you'll get notifications whenever there's a new NMRAx video available. I should be a lot smoother doing this. If I was Burt Reynolds, I would be like way smoother doing this. It should be something like this. That would be much better. All right. Anyways, that's what you got to do. You got to subscribe. You got to click the little bell icon. You'll get tons more videos. These guys are doing an awesome job, a yeoman's job. And make sure you tell them that you enjoyed my promo videos more than you enjoyed Tony Cook's promo videos. That is key. Did I do it right, Marty? Okay. All right. Thumbs up, Marty. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The toilet goes backwards. Yeah, I know that. That's cool. Up, Marty. See ya.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We'll have a second attempt at NMRAx for February, now March. A new computer, new bit of software, everything's fresh, so hopefully we'll kick this off really sweet and get going. I'm not going to hang around too long and speak, but our first clinician again has been working on a 40 by 20 layout for 7 years. He's very active in the NMRA, gives clinics. I've just been hearing all about his AP scenery that he's just got, waiting on the certificate. So without further ado, I welcome Lloyd Henchey.
Thanks, Brad. So let's get started. Hold on. Okay, so oh yeah, that would help. Sorry. Okay, so this is the first part of the 6 pillars of scenery. We're going to be talking about terrain. Basically, it's about elevation and mountains. What makes, basically, it's the first part of the scenery. So what is terrain? Terrain is just the mix of hills, mountains, plains that makes up the ground you walk on. It's a natural shape and character of the Earth's surface. Now, this here is a map of elevations. Basically, every line you see here on this particular map, we're talking about 20 feet elevation for every line. As you can see, it's not mountainous, but it's very hilly. And at the bottom, the white part is mainly the city, flatter ground, but there's still plenty of elevations in the city. It doesn't take much because, I mean, over, let's say 500 feet, if you go up 6 feet, you don't really see it. But if we're talking about HO scale, that's an inch. So there's elevation all over the place. So let's go back to for the terrain. Look at mountains. You've got mountains that are not flat, but there's no rough edges. Much easier to do when you're modeling. Or you have rugged edges where you got to cut your mountains to make it look this way. Then you've got hills, which is basically rolling hills, and there you'll see a lot of vegetation. It could be very thick vegetation or just plain grass, and that's where you'll see a lot of trees. It makes for a nice scenery because you can also have flowers or different types of plants that give it a really nice, colorful hills. Then you have outcrops. Basically, outcrops are just rocks sticking out of the ground. The rest of the ground is all grass or shrubs, and just little details like that really stands out for scenery. Now, there's different types of outcrops. There's like the top of a mountain, for example, but it's pretty, like you can see, it's pretty flat. That's considered an outcrop. Or there's other types of outcrops where you'll see boulders on the ground, if you want, which are part of the rock work underneath. So let's look at different types of rock work on your model railroad. But first, let me tell you about this clinic. There are plenty of techniques to create rock work. And what I want to show is the techniques that are based on cost, time, your comfort zone, and your willingness to achieve your objectives, and mainly fun. You'll see in the presentation that when you see somebody who shows scenery, you might find out that it's pretty expensive, everything that he's put into. So really what you got to look at is how much you're willing to spend to do your scenery, and how much time have you got, because different techniques will take different times. So let's look at a lot of different techniques. The first one is the chicken wire. I'll explain a little bit later, like go a little bit into details. So you've got the chicken wire. Then you've got the cardboard strip, which kind of took over the chicken wire. Some people use spray foam, not many, but still a way to use it. It's just that it's harder to control when the foam expands. Then you've got insulation foam, where there's a lot of carving. And of course, there's the plaster. Again, that's a lot of carving. Rock molds, ceiling tiles, scalpel mold, and my favorite, mashed potatoes with dirt. Nah, I wouldn't do it. It's not my favorite, but it's a good start. So let's look at the chicken wire. It's one of the first methods to make mounds. I think we go back into the 1700s. No, I'm just kidding. But it was one of the first ways of making mounds. It was cheap. All you had to do is crumble newspaper, and it was held down by chicken mesh. And once you had the form you wanted, you covered it with strips of newspaper that was dipped in a mixture of plaster and water. Once it was dry, then you painted it and covered it with dirt or fine turf. So doing it this way, the approximate cost per square foot is about $1.10, which is basically the mesh and the plaster. Of course, I didn't calculate the newspaper. I assumed that you have the newspaper. And the framework, well, you've already done the framework with your wood. It takes about 20 minutes per square foot. And the inconvenience is that it's pretty messy. I mean, crumbling the paper, you get black hands from the ink. And the strips, the newspaper strips that you dip into the mixture, well, it kind of drips all over the place. So it's a bit messy. So that's one way. Oh, by the way, when I say $1.10 a square foot, this is Canadian. So in US, we're talking maybe 67, 70 cents per square foot. This was a presentation I did in Ottawa at our division. So next you've got the cardboard strip, which took over, like I said, the chicken wire. Basically, it's just strips of cardboard that crisscross each other for strength. Usually, some people would use hot glue to keep it together, or they would staple it. But the finishing part of it, which is the same as the chicken wire, you just put strips of newspaper that was dipped in plaster and water. Now, of course, today some people are using rolls of plaster rolls, but I'm just going here with the basic. If you want the cheapest way to do it, that would be the way. So the approximate cost per square foot is about 25 cents, which is basically the plaster, assuming that you do have the cardboard to make all those strips. Time is about the same, about 20 minutes per square foot. And I wrote the inconvenience being messy is referring to the newspaper strip dipped in a mixture of plaster and water. And even with plaster roll, it still gets messy. But that's a cheap way of doing it. Then you have spray foam. One kind of spray foam insulation will cover about 80 square feet, depending on how thick you put it. But once dried, then comes the carving. The reason for carving is because that's the foam when it expands, you cannot control it. So if you just want a quarter of an inch of spray foam or an inch, you might end up with 2 inches of spray foam. But then you have to carve the excess that you don't need. So the approximate cost per square foot is about 30 cents a square foot, and that only includes the spray foam. So you probably have to do a backing, again, some type of backing to hold the foam. How much time does it take? Well, it depends on the carving aspect. If you have a lot of carving to do and you want to be very meticulous on how you want it to show, yeah, it's going to take a lot of time. The inconvenience is that you need good artistic mind for carving, and it will get messy. Now, this is just for the foam part. Again, some people will cover it with plaster rolls or sculptable or plaster. But here I'm just going with the basics because at first some people would just paint it and that was it. So if you're just going to paint it, we're talking about 30 cents a square foot. Then you have insulation styrofoam. Once you build the framework like you really want, then you start carving it. Again, you need some good artistic mind for the carving because you have to know what you want to represent. Making sure you got little parts sticking out for shrubs or grass. So it's a little bit more work, imagination. Once it's done, then you could just paint it and add dirt and turf to it. And again, some people will go a little bit further and put plaster molds or sculpture mold on top, and to make it easier to work the looks. So the approximate cost per square foot is about $1.22. So assuming that you have to buy a 2x8 pink foam insulation. And again, the time depends on the carving aspect. And the inconvenience, need good artistic mind for carving, and it will have lots of waste and be very messy. Another one is the plaster of Paris, which a lot of people use. A box of plaster of Paris will cover about 3 square feet, depending again on the thickness that you're going to put. Once semi-dry, then comes the carving because it's easier to carve when it's still wet a bit. It makes it easier. Once it's totally dry, then you paint it and cover it with dirt or fine turf. The approximate cost per square foot is $1.85, and that's just the plaster of Paris. So you still need some type of framing in the back. Some people use the insulation boards, or going back to the wire mesh or the cardboard strips. As long as it's covered, then you come with the plaster. So again, time depends on the carving, and and you got to make sure that by the time it gets all dry, it took a while. So again, the convenience is you need good artistic mind for carving, and it will get messy. So you got to make sure everything is covered, especially if your tracks are already laid out. Rock molds, plaster of Paris is poured into molds. Some people will also use sculpt the mold. Once dry and removed, they are placed on the foundation, and can also be done while still a bit wet, so that when you do have mountains that curve, let's say, it's easier to use your mold while it's still drying. Yeah, still drying, it's still wet. You'll need to do touch-ups to make sure that you match all the molds that you put on your mountain, so that it gives a continuous flow to the rocks. Painted and then covered with dirt or fine turf. The approximate cost per square foot is about $265 plaster of Paris, and I assume styrofoam to make so that you have some type of backing. I didn't include the cost of molds because in this picture here, I think it's a Woodland Scenics mold, but you also have Bragdon. You could also make your own molds with latex rubber, or you could even use aluminum foil. You crunch it, and that's the cheapest way to do it. But like for example, Bragdon molds, they come in like big molds, like almost 12-inch by 12-inch, or even a little bit bigger. So if you want a different look at different places, you might end up buying 2-3 molds, but I mean, it's always good. Time, since you need to create the base, make the rocks out of the mold, touch up with plaster of Paris, then the painting, it's very time consuming. It's not something you'll do in one afternoon. Well, it depends on the square footage. Then we have ceiling tiles. Broken tiles are stacked on top of each other. You could use, I know when I did that, I used carpenter glue. That was okay. Some people will use hot glue. Once they're stacked up, you see the joints of the tiles. So what you have to do is scrape. I use the fork to scrape to create strata lines so that you don't really see the tiles that were stacked up. It's like having a nice finish. Painted and then covered with dirt and turf. Now, with ceiling tiles, you got to make sure that it's very well sealed, because once you're going to paint with, let's say, acrylic paint, water paint, it's going to go into the tiles, and you could end up with mold, especially if you're in a very humid area. So what I did is I sealed it with enamel paint. It could also be sealed with glue, but then the strata lines will not be detailed, if you want. Now, the approximate cost per square foot is about 25 cents, which is the pink foam for the base. I'll explain a little bit later. If you don't have tiles at home, you could buy separate tiles, and I have the price on another page. The time is about 30 minutes per square foot. The inconvenience I found is that when you're scratching, creating your strata lines, it creates a lot of dust from, let's say, from using a fork or steel pins, or so yeah, it creates a lot of dust. But that's the only inconvenience. Then you have sculpt mold. It's just like plaster of Paris. You'll need a base. But sculpt mold will give you much more time to create the look, and you barely need any carving because you've got plenty of time to work it. Plaster will dry very fast compared to sculpt mold. Once it's painted with dirt and turf, approximate cost per square foot is about $5.25, and that's the base and the sculpt mold. It's one of the most expensive way to do mountains. Time, well, depends on the artistic look you're looking for, and the inconvenience, well, it's the cost. It's, like I said, it's very expensive. Now, again, you could, I know what I've done is I used the styrofoam, the pink styrofoam. I used, on top of that, I put plaster roll, and then I put sculpt mold, and I added mold rocks. It ends up being pretty costly, so you don't want to do that all over the place. So as a summary, chicken wire will cost you about $1.10 a square foot. Cardboard strip, 25 cents a square foot. Spray foam, 30 cents a square foot. Insulation foam, $1.22. Plaster, $1.85. Rock molds, $2.65. But then you need to buy molds, which are about $20 each. So if you're going to buy 3, 4, then it brings up the price of using rock molds. Then you've got ceiling tiles. Ceiling tiles, sorry, I wasn't able to see here. Then you got to add about $1.46 a square foot for the ceiling tile. And then sculptable, $5.25. So depending on how much, I mean, it's like I've seen some beautiful layouts or beautiful scenery. And at first I was saying, okay, I want to do exactly what he did. But if I don't have the money to do all this, then I might, I might just go with the cardboard strip and maybe later add on. But the more you add on, the more it gets cost per square foot. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about a clinic we did in the St. Lawrence division of the NFR. This clinic that I'm doing right now was the first one we did in October. And this is in collaboration with the division. We first talked about what is terrain, and in the afternoon it was hands-on, and people were getting out of their comfort zone to try something different. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 methods that we did that afternoon. We did rock molds with plaster or sculpt mold. We did the ceiling tiles, but unfortunately we didn't have time to do the insulation, styrofoam, plaster cloth, and sculpt mold. So I'll just explain to you how our clinic went. So first we talked about rock molds, and to give ideas to the members of how what to expect from rock molds. In other words, you'll see a lot of vegetation around the rock mold, around outcrops, different types of outcrops. So it was left to them to come up with an idea. So what we did with the rock molds is a few of us had brought some molds from Woodland Scenics. So we fill up the molds with plaster of Paris or sculpt mold because we had both of them at hand, and just let it dry. Now, plaster is about 1 water for 2 plaster, and sculpt mold is about 1 to 1. While this was drying, so we went, people started working on the ceiling tiles, but we'll continue on the rock molds here. So they were able to remove the rocks from the molds in about 20-30 minutes. Scalpel mold was still a bit humid, which is good if you need to curve the pieces. Now, we had brought a few pieces already made so that those that did add too much water, well, weren't able to use it. So we had plenty of extra molds, extra rocks for the clinic. Now, afterwards, everybody was able to take 3 or 4 rocks and pile them up to make it look like an outcrop. Use pieces of foam to create a backboard. We all, like everybody, was given a little piece of styrofoam so they could, stack it in the back to hold the pieces. And they use plaster of Paris or scalpel mold to fill the cracks and the flow of the outcrops. You'll have less time to work if it's plaster, so most people would use scalpel mold to create the flow of the outcrops. So even though it was not fully dry, we were able to give an entire area a coat of gray paint. Now came the fun part of trying to get colors to make sense, and that's basically trial and error. So black should be used for the cracks or seams, and finally white should be dry brushing for highlights. All paints should have a ratio of about 10 water to 1 paint. So it was fun to see everybody go to give it a go. Now here's an example. Grant Knowles from our division, he had a flat outcrop. So now now we're going to go to ceiling tiles. So the strata lines, that's what I was trying to explain, where if ceiling tile, pieces of ceiling tiles on top of each other, you didn't want to see the seam. So that was one of the examples we were showing. Or another one like this, where we wanted to show that there's vegetation, so it doesn't have to be like a flat wall. Leave some pieces sticking out so we could put little bushes or things like that. Now, if somebody was willing to try this, go ahead. But nah, nobody did. So we brought strips of 24 inches, 24 inches by an inch, and it was given to everybody, so they broke it in pieces. And then they piled them up and created the stone wall. So some people use carpenter glue, but most of the people use hot glue because it was already like hard. Because once you started scratching it with the fork, you didn't want the layers to separate. So as you can see on the right, we use the fork to scratch layers and make it uneven with some deeper areas. And of course, careful for the dust. Now, some people carved, like I said, flat areas because they were going to put vegetation on it. Now, a good coat of enamel paint is required to seal the pores, but for this workshop, we used the acrylic gray paint. We didn't have time. Well, we couldn't go outside and spray paint, so we just went straight with the acrylic paint. And when it was completely sealed, we used the other paints to create the look we were looking for. And again, it was all trial and error depending on the area you wanted to copy if you want, because in our area, which is southeastern Ontario, most of the rock that we see is gray or like a dark gray. Again, the ratio of the paint should be about 3 water to 1 paint, and use the black for the deep cracks and dry brush a bit of white for the highlights. Here's an example from Malcolm Vent. As you can see, you barely see the 3 tiles You might see it on the bit on the right there, but it really looked good once he was done with it. Now, for not rolling hill, rolling mountains, like the flat, the flat part of the mountains, that was going to be the scalpel mold. And as you can see, it's a bit blurry, but scalpel mold will give that kind of effect for your mountains. So this is I was showing the group this is what I had done, where nothing too complicated, just pile up insulation styrofoam, and yeah, you could carve a bit, but as you can see, it's pretty much straightforward. Everything is glued with carpenter glue and held in place with toothpick. Once done, I covered the entire area with cloth rolls, plaster cloth, and not paying too much attention because I was going to cover it with scalpel mold. As you can see, now I've covered the entire area with scalpel mold by doing small areas at a time, because I was looking for flat areas, and I was also putting in some rocks from the molds that I had done here and there, basically doing little outcrops. The thing that I found out is, this was done a while back, is you got to make sure that if you're going to do scalpel mold on top of the plaster cloth, you got to make sure you water the plaster cloth so that the scalpel mold will adhere to it. It's the same thing with plaster. Instead of scalpel mold, if you're using plaster to carve, you got to make sure that you've wet the plaster cloth so that it sticks together. And like I said, create some flat areas to put vegetation or trees and create rock surfaces. So use a paint color as a base. In this case, I wanted to create a limestone for a norm mining. So I started with a light gray, followed by a darker gray, some black wash, and then rust streak. That was all done with scalpel mold. And this was the final look of the area. So as you can see, there's more than one technique to achieve a result. So it's based on costs, time, and different level of difficulty. And you just have to be creative and enjoy. Time is also, like I said, it's important. I know we always say that a layout is never finished, but sometimes you might say, well, this section, I'd like to have it done like in a month from now. And next thing you know, it's taking you 3-4 months, and you might get desperate or kind of upset, and you're losing interest. So look at how much time it takes, and of course the cost. And the difficulty, well, there's so many videos out there on ways of doing different techniques. I would suggest that you check them out. There's some good ones, there's some bad ones. I mean, look at them. I've spent so many hours watching, because I didn't know anything about model railroading 7 years ago. So I spent way too much time watching videos, about almost like 2 hours a night, just trying to learn, because I'm in the boondocks, so there's nobody around to tell me or show me how to do it. So take your time and look at the different techniques. Now, if anybody's interested, since this is a 6-part scenery, the first one being terrain, and you want to follow us, this is what we did. Everybody was given a piece of 16 by 24 piece of blue insulation foam, which is going to be the base for a diorama. And the reason for the diorama is that we're going to be touching 6 different items of scenery. The first one being the rocks or the terrain. Second one is vegetation without trees. The third one is going to be water. The fourth one is trees. The fifth is roads. And the sixth is details, everything else like a fence or that you'll find in a field or things like that. So everybody's given this piece of insulation foam, 16 by 24, and we're told you're going to build a diorama with all of these things. So think first what you want to see. You want to see part of a mountain on the left. There's going to be a street or a road. You want a stream or a lake or a pond. Like just trying to imagine what you want to do on that diorama. So the first thing they did was to work on a piece of ceiling tile or molds for making outcrops or plaster or sculpture mold, and they needed to have it completed for the next month. So if any one of you want to do this, rewatch the video, which will be posted later in a few weeks, month, and you'll be ready for our next clinic, which will be on vegetation. Just to give you an idea of what people have done so far, this is for the like the mountains. As you can see on the top, we have it was ceiling tiles. In the middle, there's the foam. The third one was, I know that he's building a bridge also, and there's going to be a stream. The bottom left, he's done outcrops and ceiling tiles, and the one on the right, that was mine. Basically, I show, like I brought the one with the outcrops to show them what they're going to be working on. And the following month, all my grass or the vegetation is all done, so to help them see what they're going to be able to do. So what's next? Scenery clinics continue. On our ongoing scenery clinic, we'll look at diverse avenue for creating compelling landscape. So look at the cost consideration, ensuring that your scenic pursuit aligns with your budgetary constraints. We'll look at time, a precious resource will be thoughtfully addressed, offering insights into efficient methods that suit your schedule. And finally, we'll tap into the realm of artistic capabilities, unlocking the creative potential that transforms scenery from ordinary to extraordinary. Those are the dates. So our next one is March 23rd here on NMRAx, and we're going to be talking about vegetation. There's no, like I said, there's no trees, so we're going to be looking at bushes, flowers. We're going to look at grass, and again, we're going to be talking about different prices, different ways of saving. For example, you could buy mats already done, or you could make your own mats with a little trick of layering static grass and different colors, etc. Same thing with water. There's different ways of doing water. And trees, well, that one has its own, because there's, I think we came up with 12 ways of doing trees. And of course, each technique of doing trees has extra techniques if you want. Roads, we're going to be looking at different types of roads, going from a dirt road to a gravel road to cobblestone to, like, again, there's so many roads you can do. And details, well, we all know that there's a lot of details I could go into scenery. So as you can see, this is the first one, and it's based on mountains or rock work. So if you have any questions, like I said, it's in collaboration with the St. Lawrence Division. I was spearheading the project, but it's really a division presentation. Usually we have 3 people that talk about different techniques, so I'm not the only one talking. I'll come with the basics, then we have 3 people that will talk about different ways, and then I'll come back and tell the people, okay, this afternoon the clinic is on this, or this is what we're going to be doing. And it was very surprising. A lot of people showed up and stayed after the meeting, and hands-on, and it was fun. People were out of their comfort zone, trying new things, new ways. Everybody was very happy. So I guess that's it. If you have any questions.
Lloyd, thank you very much for a good start of 6 clinics there, by the looks of it. We'll kick off with a couple of questions that came in today. The first one was, what was the name or brand of paint you used to seal the ceiling tile with?
It was a spray. I don't know. It's a spray can. It says enamel paint, gray enamel paint. I can't remember the name because that was done about 5 years ago.
Okay, so you'd recommend an enamel over a latex? Right?
Yeah, because latex is water. It's a water base, right?
Yep.
So, like in my basement, it's very humid in the summer. Very humid. So I was told that by watching some of the videos that if you put water in those tiles, you could create some mold. So I didn't want that to happen. So I learned on one videos that you seal it with enamel paint, and it works great. And then I was able to come back and use acrylic paints on top of that, and yeah.
So that leads me into the next question. Being down here in Australia, very humid environment that I live in, is there any one method that you would recommend steering away from that would, you know, either break down over time or have mold and stuff grow in it? Is there something that I should not be looking at out of these methods?
I was going to say, if you're going to do any plaster or scalpel mold, anything that has water in it, you should wait till winter. Yeah, or if you ask me what's my favorite, it's definitely scalpel mold. It's expensive, but I love it because it gives me enough time to do what I want to do. And if I add, like I said, like rock molds here and there, it's much easier to just blend, and it's not rough because I like to see vegetation on my scenery. Like I said, the only cliff I have is my mining company.
Yep.
But yeah.
So that was going to be my next question. What was your favorite method that you've used on your layout? So have you tried many of these methods on your own layout at home, or you've picked one and stuck with it?
No, I tried. I've got ceiling tiles, which I got a wall of ceiling tiles about 3 inches, 4 inches high. And that's, sorry, 4, 8, about 10 feet long. And it's all ceiling tiles. It's like, it's really cut into, the track is cut near that rock face. Then I've tried, I place like pretty flat scalpel mold, and I put outcrops here and there, so that was the molds. And then I've got my mining company, which is yeah, I've used styrofoam and scalpel mold. So I can say I've tried pretty much a lot of ways. I didn't do the chicken mesh. I've got some cardboard mesh that I've done because I've got, let's say, 2 different levels of track, and between the 2 levels, because it's kind of cookie cutter, to join the 2 pieces together, I would put cardboard strips. So yeah, I've done 4 methods.
Nice, nice. I just got one quick question as well. I've used plaster on my layout, and I'm sure you've seen this bit of rock work before. Can you just explain your method for collaring that rock mold after you've created it? So I see you put the grey paint down. After that, the acrylics, do you use washes? Do you make your own washes? What's the method there?
Yeah, well, the one I showed you, I painted everything light gray. This was like I bought a pint of gray acrylic paint, not acrylic paint, but latex, not latex, um, the type of paint for the walls there, but not enamel paint, latex, yeah. So I painted everything gray, light gray, and then I came back with acrylic paints, like 2 or 3 shades of gray, always darker, 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 and then I had the black and the white and the rust color. So my paint was mixed at that time. I think it was like 15 or 20 to 1, 20 drops of water to 1 paint, and I just splatted all over the place. Nothing very particular. I wasn't paying attention to anything. It was just, yeah, just drop it on, and wherever it leaks, it leaks. And then I would come back and do the next color, which is a little bit gray, a little bit darker, and then I would splat it different places, and then again the other gray, splat it different places again, and then came back with the white for dry brushing, and that was mainly all the pieces that were like kind of sticking out a bit. That was to give it a contrast. And then the rust part to create like the ore, were basically, again, acrylic paint with basically small streaks here and there. So there was no particular artistic way of doing it besides throwing it on.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, my last question. I've got a mate down here. He's been in the hobby for quite some time, but he's procrastinating on his layout and taking the next step. He's got bench work down. It's been like that for 10 years now. What can you recommend for him to start in scenery? Like, he doesn't know which end to start from. I think it's all a little confronting. How would you recommend stepping into getting some train down onto his baseboard?
The next clinic is on vegetation, and one thing I was telling one of the guys at the NMRA division meeting is that since if you look around, you don't see flat areas, like I was telling you, like 6 feet is only an inch in HO scale. So it's an expensive way, but take scalpel mold and just splat it on your base, and this will, when you put static grass on top or turf or whatever, it creates bumps, if you want, and it represents land. It's not flat, and just by doing that, well, it kind of motivated me because I did a small part and I started putting bushes here and there, and it started looking nice. And I go, okay, I got to finish this area, and I still have wiring to do, but I'm really into scenery. I guess you got to start one just pick an area. Tell Marty to pick an area, and just go at it. It's I mean, if the worst case scenario he doesn't like it, you could always scrape it up and throw it out. But you'll see that when doing scenery, you don't do mistakes, because you could always cover it up with a bush or trees or like, for example, I had one full area that was done, and somebody said, well, if that's the woods, you've got perfect grass, and you don't see perfect grass in the woods. And I go, well, yeah, it's true. So I scraped everything out and started doing static grass with like bushes and to make it look like really rough. So I don't know, it's for me to get motivated in scenery is just go ahead and start in one small area.
I think that's some good advice, and I look forward to the rest of your clinics. I'm actually going to quickly timestamp this and email Martin to watch this afternoon and see if I can get a bit of motivation for him. But Lloyd, how can everyone watching see some of your layout, see some of the stuff you're doing? I know I see it. I'm always amazed by the photos you put up each time. Where can they see your work?
If they're on Facebook, they could always go to MHO Junction. That's where I basically keep people up to date on what's happening. And I do have a YouTube page, but if I post once every 3-4 months, that's about it, because when filming, I don't know what to say. So I'd rather have pictures. I'm just going to show you something very fast. Some people have already seen it. I'm getting ready for the road clinic.
Okay, nice.
Okay, it's cobblestone, covered with asphalt. And this is another one where you can see the cracks.
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I've been working on, because that's clinic number 5, but for us it's in March, clinic number 5. So it'll be fun. Even the water one was fun.
I think
I
there's
learned a lot for the water, because the first thing I used was epoxy, but there's other ways of doing water that's still fantastic and much cheaper.
I think that's the thing. Lloyd, these clinics that you're going to give open the eyes to everyone. There's always some other way out there. We're always setting our own little way. It's always just expanding and learning from that. So I look forward to your clinic at the end of this month, the 23rd, I think it is. And once again, thank you for your time today. And I'll catch you at the end of the month.
Okay, I'll see you. Like I said, if anybody wants to join in, rewatch the video and go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, Lloyd.
Okay.
All right, welcome back to clinic number 2 of our postponed NMRAx from February. Tonight, it's all going to plan really well, except for no Jordan. So Jordan, yet again, let down the team, throws Gordy in the deep end, but we'll make ends meet, won't we, Gordy? We'll get through it.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Hopefully, you figure your audio out. It's kind of a bit funny again, but anyway.
It's a one-man band, and I'm not getting paid very much, so yeah, we'll make it work. So our next clinician clinic is all about a podcast that's just been released in the last few months. Not in the last month anyway, that I've seen. At your workbench, Gordy, Jordan, I don't know where you find time to put any more into the model railroad hobby at all, but you've come up with another podcast. I enjoy listening to it over a coffee of a morning when it comes out. But do you want to tell us a bit about the podcast, and we'll hit the ground rolling?
Sure, because this might find me a volunteer to do some editing, which is why the podcast hasn't gone out. So the idea was that there's loads of podcasts out there, Modeler's Life and others, but we thought there's a bit of a gap in the market just to do, well, it's not market because we're not trying to make any money, but just my commute is like 10 minutes, right? And these podcasts are like 2-3 hours. It takes me more than a week's worth of commuting to just listen to them. And I could listen to them at work, but I just can't. It's just not the job that I do. I'll end up writing down Lionel's, whatever Lionel's just said, right? So the idea was start a podcast, just tips and tricks at the workbench, help answer some basic questions, help some people out. Maybe would work better on video, but we haven't really got the faces for video, even though we're here. So we thought we'll do it as audio, and then we update Gordy.uk website, my website, with the episode and some pictures and some text to go along with it. So it's usually about 10-15 minutes. Quick tip, quick trick, just something you can think of at your workbench. I mean, we do these meetings with the British region every 2 weeks. We've done them now. The Aussies turn up as well, so we have the Aussies, the Brits, all the Europeans all on a call on a Saturday morning, and it just generally turns into 2 hours of tips and tricks and what's Gordy bought this week, basically. So we thought, well, we could turn that into a podcast and people might be interested in it. So, but we didn't make any big fanfare. We're not in it for any commercial thing. I ain't got any time for that. But the problem that we've had in the last sort of 6 weeks is that I just haven't had time to edit it. We've got recorded content, but we haven't been putting anything out. So I kind of need to figure that out. But there's a lot going on in the NMRA, so that's kind of taking up all of my evenings, which means I've got no time to edit. So, but that's what the podcast is all about, Brad.
Sounds like you need to upskill your co-host a little bit there.
What, to turn up?
Well, to turn up for one, but maybe do a bit of editing.
So yeah, this was going to be like an hour a month, and it is an hour a month to record it, but it's about 10 hours on top of that to do all the editing and post-production. So you know how it is. It's just the way it is. But we will get some more out when we've got a bit more time.
Perfect. So
what we do. So Jordan thought I could come along with him, and he's not here, to answer some questions that we've had from people on model railroading and help some people out. So let's go for it.
So yeah, let's kick the ball off here. I've got a few questions that we've generated from the team in here, but everyone out there in the chat, if you've got questions for Gordy, anything model railway related, I think we'll answer. I'm not sure where we'll draw the line, but we'll see how it goes. Throw them up in the chat. I've got the chat up. I can read them straight out, and I'm sure Gordy will try to answer the most diplomatic and best he can. So,
I'll do my best.
Gordy, why don't we kick off? Let's start from the very beginning. People coming into the hobby, how do they choose scale and gauge? What's your recommendations to look for in selecting a starting point?
So, well, my number one piece of advice is to go to a train show and see some different layouts and different scales so you understand the size of it. The problem with that, though, is train shows are in big rooms. So It can be, you can think, oh wow, look, this is in such a small space, but because it's in such a big room, it looks a lot smaller than it actually is. But yeah, the number one thing you've got to consider when you're considering scale is how much space and time do you have for your railroad? Because if you go for a smaller scale, it is potentially less level of detail you need to put in to have a superbly detailed. But if you're just a beginner, you don't really generally care. But as you get into it, you go for a smaller scale, less level of detail, although the bits are smaller, but 20 foot by 20 foot and put N scale in it, or 20 foot by 20 foot and put O scale in it, is two completely different model railroads. N scale in 20 foot by 20 foot, pretty big main line, pretty big layout. That's the same size as Speed's layout room, basically. A lot of layout in there. But if you went to do that in O scale or G scale, you would be looking at a much smaller layout. So first and foremost is how much space have you got? Now, the next thing is probably budget. So certain niche scales like Z and S and anything with narrow gauge in it is more expensive than HO, N, or O. Although O is quite expensive. It depends if you go in O gauge or O scale. So if you're going free rail, which is where most people get into the hobby, can be cheaper. You pick up a lot of stuff at swap meets, but it's not really scale. It's not going to give you a long term that same level of enjoyment as something else. So think about your budget, how much you've got to spend. If you've not got a lot of space, doesn't mean you have to do N scale, but N scale is obviously a good medium. If you're into European, there's also TT, which is 1/20th scale, which is kind of in between, but that's not really very available on the American market. So budget. So small scales generally more affordable, but you can fit more in the space. And if you're one of these people that wants to pack your room with track, pack your room with turnouts, they're all going to be electric turnouts. You're going to have loads of locomotives in stock. That really starts to add up. That gets really expensive. So I was having a look a few weeks ago. An N-scale boxcar now can retail anywhere between $25 and $40 brand new. You can buy stuff secondhand as well, which is a good way to get into the hobby. But an O-scale boxcar, which takes up the room of 6 N-scale boxcars, is between $50 and $80. So it, unfortunately models don't, like when you buy chicken at the grocery store, right? And it does a comparison generally to the price of the chicken per kilo or per pound, no matter how big the pack size is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, unfortunately, model railroads don't do that. So they don't say 6 inches of rolling stock to the dollar, right? It doesn't quite work like that. But in terms of budget, you need to think about how much you're going to buy, because you buy more for smaller scale. So in the end, the overall total will be probably more or the same as what you would spend on larger scale equipment. But in larger scale equipment, you've got the compromise of space. So you've got to balance the two out. And then I suppose it's the people that know what they want to model. So don't just want to get into doing trains around in a circle, whatever. Know what they want to model. That's also a consideration for what scale you choose. If you say you wanted to model the PD River short line, right? Then the only people that are Intermountain are just about to make out the model, come out with the models. I think the Jeep 10s or Jeep 11s or something, or Jeep 16s for the PD River. If you wanted to model that short line, your equipment's available in HO. So it's worth having a look what scale your equipment's available in if you're not somebody that wants to scratch build everything, which as a beginner, very unlikely that you want to scratch build everything as a beginner. So you want to look for availability of the equipment and whether that's to the standard. This is where we come back into detail and realism. are you happy with an entry-level model? Are you happy with a roundhouse or an entry-level backman model? Or do you want Athearn, Genesis, scale trains, intermounting? Do you want all the detail parts? Does it have to look just like the real thing to you? And that will have a big bearing on where you go with your prototyping your scale. And I suppose finally it's kind of like operational interest and skill level. If you can't see it, it ain't going to be very interesting to you. If you've got Z scale and if you have to put binoculars on like me and you, and you're doing Z scale and you can't see it, ain't worth it. Equally, if your operational interest is that you want realistic operations and you want to be able to put the handbrakes on the freight cars, then bigger scales are the way to go. You're not going to get. See, if you buy an O scale covered hopper, for example, all the hatches will open. If that's what you want, go for that. If you want, to see big long trains running through the landscape and you want a model horseshoe curve, you're probably going to want to go N scale, right? But it's not impossible. And then it's also about your skill level. So the larger the scale tends to be a bit more forgiving for a beginner than the smaller the scale, but not always true, because a lot of people get into N scale, do T-track, whatever. That's not always the case. It's just the stuff's bigger. It's easier to get your hands on. It's generally easier to, have a go with a kit. So that's kind of where you are with starting it. The final thing I would say to anyone who's thinking about getting into it is just do something. So just buy a kit like a house kit, like a cheap, less than $20 kit in a couple of different scales and see what you feel most comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, you'll have achieved something, you'll have taught yourself some skills. It doesn't matter if you don't end up using it on your layout. If you end up doing a HL layout and you've got an N scale building, just put it in the background on the layout for forced perspective. Put it up on a hill or something like that. So there's, to try it out, because it can get really frustrating. The one thing you don't want to do, and we'll get into layout design and track planning in a little bit, but the one thing you don't want to do is set yourself an unrealistic goal, get fed up with it, stop using it, spend all that money, and then try and offload or get out the hobby or change direction, which we all do. But you change direction a little bit, and then you're losing loads of money on what you've done, and not just money but time as well. So, take your time if you're new into the hobby to decide what you want to do, and try a few things on the cheap. You can build a T-track module. It doesn't cost that much. You can get a kit for $50. So, if you wanted to try and scale out stuff like that.
Now that me just coming into the hobby, we'll use this for an example. I've been to a train show. I've been to the local hobby shop a couple of times. I've bought myself something. I'm excited. I'm really pumped. What should I do next? Do I sit down and try to plan something? Do I look for a local club? Do I find an organisation? Where should I take that next step to build myself into the hobby?
Get whatever you've bought out of the box.
Okay.
Step one.
Perfect.
Step one, get something out of the box. Actually use it. Step two, get trains running as soon as possible. And you know what? If that means running it on the kitchen table or running it on the floor, get on with it. Because the best thing to do in the hobby is to actually do something. But obviously, I would recommend to anyone to go to their local NMRA division and get support and guidance and join the community of model railroading and have that fellowship that goes with that. Of course I would. But ultimately, you've just come back from a train show. You've just bought something. Get it out of the box. Number one thing.
I agree with you there, Gordy. I think just get stuck into it. You've got nothing really to lose. You've made that investment. Have fun with it. See how it goes. But really reach out to a local club, NMRA, get involved, because that's where the discussions can start to guide you. Is that the correct scale that you're thinking about? What interests in the hobby you're actually going to be able to have? And it's not going to cost you very much at all. Grab a rail pass, join in, all the above.
And without support, it can be very frustrating. These lone wolves really impress me, because I can imagine how frustrating it can be when you're on your own and you've not got anyone to just go, hey, you know, have you tried this or have you tried that? And certainly, you know, it's hard to sell it, but trust me, once you're in it and you realize and you're getting that level of support, it's something that's going to be with you throughout your model railroading journey. So, you know, the sooner you can engage with that support and have that support network around you, the better. And you know, find out the great thing about the NMRA and local model railway clubs, particularly, especially ones that are 100% NMRA, but NMRA in general, is someone will always invite you over to their house. You can always get invited to come and operate. You can always get invited to run some trains. And everybody's been a beginner. Everyone was new once, right? So there's no one that I have met that when they know you're a beginner will go out of their way to make you feel unwelcome and horrible, right? That no one wants to do that. Everyone will help you out. I remember the first time I was given a Digitrax throttle, and I'd never used the Digitrax throttle, and I got completely lost with the two knobs on the thing, and turned up what I meant to turn down, and all this, and ran somebody's big boy through their yard and did a catastrophic derailment across their yard, and we just laughed about it, and got on with it, and found a different throttle for me that my fat fingers could operate better. So you know, it's all about a bit of fun. But number one thing, get doing something.
Get doing something. Yep, totally agree. Okay, so got my stuff out of the box. I've been to a couple of meetings locally, been chatting online to different people. I think I know where I want to go with the hobby and what I want to do at home here. Track planning, layout planning. Where do I start? What do I do? Do I pull out a pen, scribble a bit of a layout out and go for gold, or is there other things that I need to start listing? Where would you recommend kicking off from there?
First thing I would recommend somebody do is, when it's generally their first layout, is measure out the space that you've got, get your track. If you've got a copier, copy your turnouts that you've decided you want to use, print off as many as you want, more than you're going to need, and then the best way to start doing track planning is to put it on the layout or on the floor of the room that you're going to build the bench work in. That's, if you've never built a layout before, that is the best way to do it, because getting a pen out, you're going to draw angles that you can't do. You're going to draw radiuses that are too tight. You're going to draw things that are going to hit each other. You're going to forget about clearance. You're going to forget about reach, all that kind of stuff. So the best thing to do is to mark that area out on your floor in your basement or wherever it's going, or on a sheet of plywood or whatever. Photocopy the turnouts and then try and draw it in. Decide what radius you're going to use. So get yourself a bit of flex track, or decide on the set curve radius you have. Lay that out on the table or on the board or on the floor even. Get your rolling stock and check it'll go around the corner. Because if you're going to run Jeeps and small locos, it's going to go around quite a tight radius. If you're going to try and put passenger equipment round a radius that would be more suitable for an industrial area on a layout, you're probably going to find out real soon that either it won't go round, it'll hit the buildings because it'll overhang that much, or it just looks terrible and you can't live with it. So that's the best thing to do. But moving on from that, yes, get a pen. Now, different manufacturers of track, some of them do little templates of their track, so you can all draw it to a kind of a scale. So Cato do that as definitely in N scale for their unitrack sections. You can use one of those with a pen. You get familiar with it, but any sketch, it's good to do a sketch with a pen, but it's just a sketch. It's not a scale drawing. So you've got to remember that. So when you want to move into the world of scale drawings, there are many different bits of software online that you can do that with. If you're an engineer, you're probably going to go towards one of the CAD track products because you're going to be more familiar with that. You're going to be more comfortable. If you want a good entry-level one that's got most of the track systems in the world, NMRAx is the best way to go. It's a very small license fee. You can use it without a license. You download it for free. I think you can have 150 parts on your layout, but you're very soon going to realize that that's not going to work. So you just pay the license fee. It's very cheap, really, for what it is. And for your license fee, you get upgrades and you get downloads, and there's loads of different, even structures, scenery, aspects, track, and you can pull your layout into a railroading game. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you can pull your layout out of any rail, put it into there, and you can run some trains around it before you actually commit. So you can go, actually, that won't work, or yeah, this does work. So that track planning, do not just take a pen, draw as much track as possible and get on with it. Now, there's loads more we could talk about with track planning, but that's the basics of how to draw a track, how to draw something up.
I think one of the key points there that you mentioned is don't be afraid to get onto the ground, get onto a bit of bench work, and actually use your rolling stock to gauge scale. I know I've come unstuck 90-foot freight cars, overhangs, clearances. You think you're going to fit 4 cars in a siding or a spur, but realistically it's 3 with the overhangs. So definitely don't be afraid just to have a play around with what you've got.
Totally, yeah, and that's like my modules now. So my HO Fremo modules just there in my train room, I added 7 modules a year and a half ago. Some NMRA thing came along and took away all my gameplay in time. But right now, there isn't a set track plan of what's going down on there, but there's models on the layout set out to give me a length of how long something is, how wide it is, where it is, how that's all going to work. So, take as long as you need to commit to it. But I have got part of the layout running, so I can run a train. So that's the key thing. If you can't run a train, you're gonna get real bored quick.
Bored quick. So I guess that leads into the next question I have here is, what happens if you want to make that jump into building something, but you're not fully committed to build the Empire layout in the basement, in the shed, anything like that? Where do you recommend going? I know there's a lot of different module standards out there, NMRA, Fremo, T-Track. Do you have any particular preference? Do you see advantages? Like I see some of the stuff over in the States and Europe with Fremo. They build huge layouts, heaps of people turn up. What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I don't necessarily think you need to follow a modular standard, but it obviously helps if you do, because it answers a lot of things for you. But I don't know why anyone wouldn't build a sectional layout. In an N scale particularly, build a T-Track module, because at least you can practice everything you need to do on a T-Track module. The other thing, if you're in any other scale, what you should think about doing before you build that monster layout is trying to build just a section of it, or build a chainsaw layout. So a chainsaw layout is just something where you can practice all your skills. You know it's going to look either great or shite. It doesn't really matter what it looks like, right? You're just getting the experience and practicing all the skills. You're not worrying about how good it is or how bad it is. But yeah, in terms of, if I was to start anything I do is sectional, unless it's a small switching layout I can put under my arm, and I've got 4 layouts that are all fit in the back of my car in one piece with the staging yard and everything. So I have a number of show layouts that are one plank, fine, on a shelf, perfect. But if you were going to build a layout, I would always recommend you build it sectionally. If you use a modular standard, Fremo is the one that is the most open in terms of what you can do. The only restriction is the end plates, whereas T-Track is very restricted. N-Track is extremely restricted. NMRA HO modules, extremely restricted. But a Fremo module is very much open, unrestricted. And the end, you can have many sections to make up a module. So you can do something really wacky as long as the end plates where you would put it to somebody else's stuff is correct to the standard. So yeah, it's worth getting into that, but not everybody not everybody feels comfortable with the woodworking skills. We don't have those skills necessarily anymore. So, there are people that make bench work that laser cut it. So you can look into that. It generally ends up being quite lightweight. I 3D print my bench work. I wouldn't recommend a beginner trying to do that, but you but you can do it. The
The
to be
possibilities
honest, if
are
you're just making it as a rectangle, though, it's pretty basic. You can use dimensional lumber to do that. But if you want to start doing curves and you want to start doing junctions and all that kind of good stuff, go out there and look at some of the suppliers of laser cut benchwork. Or you can even pay somebody to do it for you if that's something that you really don't want to do.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Don't go into this hobby thinking that your first time around is going to be your only time around. Take the opportunity. You just seen in the clinic before with Lloyd, there is multiple ways to achieve an outcome. Have a go at them all. Find which method works for you, which one you're comfortable with, and give it a go. That's my take on all that. Now,
Totally.
Gordy, just on the beginner side of things, one more question before we deep dive into some more complicated aspects to the hobby. Power control of the layout. What do I look at? I thought you just hook two wires up, turn the knob, trains go around and around, but I've been informed there's DCC, there's sound. Someone was talking about some Bluetooth thing to me the other day. What's all this about? Where do I go for? Yeah. What do I look for? What should I be looking for? Where's the draw cards to certain aspects?
All right. So this could be a whole hour in itself, but basically, your models are going to come with, if you buy a train set, track, controller, rolling stock, locomotive in a box, you're gonna have some kind of control system for it. The most common one that comes with a train set is DC, which is just direct current, positive or negative to the track, and reverse the polarity to reverse the direction of the loco. Dead simple. You can run DCC and even DCC and sound locos on a DC layout. The problem is it's just power to the track. It's on or it's off. You can control the voltage going to it with a potentiometer, which is the knob that you turn. But if you've got two trains on there and you turn the knob to go, both trains are going to go, right? So that's the complication of DC. It's been around for a very, very long time. It's what the majority of people in the world use for controlling their layouts, no matter what people think. But probably the next thing is DCC. That's the most common. DCC is digital command control, and that a lot of people say it's just two wires, right? Well, DC can be just two wires if we're just having a loop. Makes no difference. The wiring for DCC can become quite complicated because it's alternating current. The biggest difference is that with DCC, your locomotive has a decoder on board. So the command station talks to the locomotive. The locomotive does not talk to the command station, so it's only one way. But the command station talks to the locomotive, tells it where to go. Works really well, but if you're setting something up on the floor and it's temporary or it's dirty, DCC is going to start to give you some problems. So DCC is the way to go for 100%. It's what the majority of people use. It gives you the sound options where your locomotive can beep its horn, ring its bell, make noises as it goes, fire up the prime mover. That brings the whole, once you've got one DCC sound locomotive, it brings the whole thing to life. But as somebody said to me only last weekend, I just want my train to go round. DC is the way to go. And there's some fantastic DC layouts out there. There's different things you can do around isolating sections so that there's power. A controller is only powering some part of your layout and not all of it as you get a bigger layout. So DC is perfectly fine. People have used it for a long time, but you're not going to get all the features and functionality of the newer locomotives unless you start going into DCC. So at some point, you're going to need to make that investment. The sooner you make that investment, the better, because once you've got loads of DC equipped models, which DCC models can work on DC, but DC models cannot work on DCC, or well they can, but it's not great. you're going to have to start putting decoders into your locomotives, and that can be a skill in itself. So probably better to try to go for DCC from the get-go and just learn once, not learn twice. But the majority of people still in model railroading around the world use DC, and that's absolutely fine.
Perfect.
There's also other things which we could talk about if you want to, but there's certainly in the larger scales, there's power on board where you've got a lithium-ion battery in the model, and it can talk to independent remote control throttle. It could talk to Bluetooth throttles. It could talk to your phone through Wi-Fi. It can DCC through the track, but power is on the locomotive. There's tons and tons of options there for power on board. There's Blue Army. You mentioned Blue Army, so Bluetooth's becoming a more common control mechanism. A lot of these Bluetooth locomotives will also work with DCC, which is great. But for a newcomer just coming in, you've got some children there, and they've got their own tablets, and they want to control their locomotives on their tablets rather than having separate controllers. And a bit like I suppose it's a bit like having a game console, right? You won't want to keep buying all these controllers. You can control your train with your phone, and that's the idea of Blue Army. So Bluetooth connects directly peer to peer to the locomotive, and you drive it with your phone, and it allows you very quickly to have multiple controllers. As you get more into the hobby, you'll realize quite quickly that these things also have Wi-Fi on them, and so you can use engine driver or Wii throttle and other things like that to control your DCC command station. And so everybody that turns up to your layout is walking with something that in the hand usually that they can control it. But if you've got young children around, you might want both systems so that you're not giving your very expensive phone to your child for them to drop it on the concrete floor in the basement and smash it or anything like that. So there's loads of different. There's a lot we could do 2 hours.
I think you're right. We could talk for hours and hours about different stuff here, but I look at it now coming from a few years within the hobby. I would seriously recommend do your research, feel where you're comfortable at. I would definitely look into Bluetooth as a starting point. You don't need the command station, but you get all the benefits from a full-blown DCC sound locomotive, and then you can build from there. That's where I'd be looking at and recommend. But that's all the basic stuff. Pardon?
Yeah. If you were new into the hobby, for sure, but Bluetooth is only available in certain scales. So if you're going into N scale or Z scale, you're probably not going to find a Bluetooth equipped locomotive. So it comes back to the choice of where you go determines a lot of this stuff, you know.
Definitely.
But
okay, so that's the basic stuff out of the way. We've got into the hobby. We've been kicking around now for 5 or 6 years. You get sidetracked. You've got a grand plan. You're moving forward. You're involved with a community. You start taking your hobby to the next level. I've got a workbench sitting in front of me. Let's touch on some tips and tricks that you can recommend as you progress your skills for this hobby. So currently sitting on my workbench, I've got a little bit of track work, but I've also got paints, glues, and a model half started. Can you, I know there's been a podcast already on this, what's some of the things that you could recommend putting onto my workbench to, save spilling it, or especially if I'm up on the wife's dining room table? She loves it when I spill the glue everywhere.
Okay, so number one thing with any model railroad workbench is safety. So everything needs to have its own place. If you've got young people in the building, which I know you have, but they're not as young as mine. If you've got young people in the building, young people will disappear into the room where the workshop is, and the next thing you know, they've got an X-Acto knife, or that beautiful, very expensive model paint you've got is a Picasso on the floor, all over that model that's half built on the bench, and that model's probably smashed on the floor. So most important thing is, tidy life, tidy workbench, and safety. So make sure that you've got power to your workbench, but you've got the ability somewhere else away from the workbench to kill that power. Make sure that you've got a place to put sharps, a place to put used sharps, because you will be replacing these blades and things. Make sure you've got a trash can Make sure you've got a trash can, so that's where trash goes. And then make sure those paints and everything have paint holders to go in. There's loads of things you can get. You can just cut a hole in some wood and stop your bottle from falling over. But don't just have a bottle sitting on your desk. You wouldn't do it if it was like back in the day. There was a reason why people had ink things that sat in a holder where they dipped the fountain pens to write, and they didn't just have a bottle of ink sitting with papers all over their desk and a bottle of ink, right? There's a reason for that. The other thing to think about is where you put your workbench and what you're going to be doing. So if you're going to be using aerosols, you're going to be using solvents. There's odors, and there's also toxic fumes can come off those. So you don't want to be using them in the dining room table, right? No, not a good idea.
You sure?
No.
Okay.
So yeah, no. So you're probably not going to want to invest straight in a spray booth, although if you've been in 4 or 5 years, you might have one. If you don't, go and use your spray paints outside in a ventilated area, maybe in the garage or whatever. Consider humidity and things, especially in Australia and the south of the United States and the time of year. But go and do it away. Go and do it away from other people. Wear masks, wear safety equipment, and all that kind of good stuff. But yeah, workbench area needs to be thought through. You're going to end up having tool storage. You're going to have paint storage. You're going to have storage for models. And there's two big things that I see people forget about with their workbench. And anyone who's actually had me in their house looking at their layout, I tend to go and have a look at your workbench as well, right? Because I quite like looking at how different people have tackled a workbench, sometimes more than I do like looking at the layout. I like staging yards, and I've got a bit of a thing for workbenches, but that's just the way it goes, right? So number one thing is lighting. So if you can, the lighting on your workbench needs to be the same as the lighting on your layout. Use the same LEDs, from the same source, use the same number of Kelvin of the lights, use the same hue of the lights, because the model that you build on the workbench is going onto the layout, ideally, right? So if you build it and then you put it on your layout and suddenly your white wall looks yellow, you're going to be pretty miffed off, right? So make sure that you use the same lighting, and also you want no shadows. So I have a light on my desk that's like a circle, available from Green Scene or Green Man Scenics or something like that. Anyway, it's a big circle thing with an LED strip in it. You can make the same thing out of a bit of PVC pipe, just cut it and put the strip onto it. But that lights up my entire workbench. Where my hands are, there's no shadows. So lighting's the one. The second thing is things have to have drying time, or you need to step away because your modeling time isn't full time. Very few people can start a model and stay at the workbench till it's finished, because you've got a life and you need to sleep. Some people need to sleep anyway. So one of the things that people forget is, where do you store the model safely between working on it? You can't just leave it on your workbench. So many people leave half-finished projects on the workbench, and then some well-meaning family member comes in and drops a book on it or something like that, and your model's destroyed, or knocks something over, and now your model's got a nice bow in it or whatever, right? So it depends how many projects you've got on the go, but there's lots of different options for that. You can buy a bookcase that's just for your models. I've seen people, the best one I've ever seen is somebody used a catering, like in a canteen, you've got the unit where you put the trays in.
Correct.
So you've got like different trays. So somebody used one of those and had the model and all the bits on the tray, slid it in, slid it out, put it on the workbench, did whatever to it, slid it back in, took the next model out, carried on with that, right? And if you're batch building lots of things, that's a great way of doing it. You can have stuff at different stages, whatever you want. You can also, there's a company called Really Useful Box. They are in the US. You can get them from Staples. They do a 7-liter plastic shelving unit. And you same principle, you can use one of those shelves that you model. It's got a nice deep side, unlike the tray. It's got a nice deep side, you're less likely to lose it. But cleanliness, lighting, wet storage, and safety, all the most important things of a workbench.
Perfect.
But you can work on your knee, in front of the TV, sitting with the wife, or the husband. Generally keeps bliss in the home, right? I know that Peter Borchard's the president of the British region does this. He's got a little table. I've seen it in his living room. He brings it out, sits it in front of himself on the sofa with the wife. She's watching Man United, and he's there building whatever kit it is for his layout rather than being off in the layout room. So by all means, you don't have to have a static workbench or a workshop. You can move around and do some bits of your projects in different parts of the home, but make sure it goes somewhere safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, safety's key. Okay, I've got my workbench set up, ready to go. Really deep diving into the hobby, operations, rolling stock, getting my roster up to date. I've bought a whole heap of cars in the past, freight cars. I want to renumber some of these freight cars. I've got multiple cars here with the same road number. How do I get those numbers off? What's the method I should be doing here, Gordy?
Don't do it. No. It can be hard, right? It can be hard. There's different methods. I'm going to assume we're not doing it in N scale because it's very hard. But you basically you don't really want to strip that entire model, right?
No.
With most people are just changing a number. So there's a couple of things you need to do. Number one, you need to find a way to safely remove just the number or the lettering that you want to remove. And you need to decide whether you're going to remove the entire number or you're just going to change one digit or two digits. So you need to do some masking, and you need to find a thing that will take it off. So generally, people, if you want to keep the paint underneath, don't go and take paint stripper to it, right? But you can put some. It depends, because you need to work out whether it's a decal, a transfer, whatever you want to call it, or whether it's pad printed. If it's paint, it's pad printed. Then the best thing to use is T-cut.
Okay.
Very, very small amount of T-cut, and it'll take it off, especially lettering for like Bachmann. Bachmann, honestly, it's like as if they tattoo the stuff on, but you can take it off with T-cut, no problem at all, which is the same thing you used to remove scratches from your car. Just go easy with it, and remember it's an abrasive, so use carefully in light quantities. It doesn't take a lot. Then in terms of putting your numbers back on, what you don't want is that film there. So the first thing we're going to do is get our car, strip it as much as we can, so we've just got the shell, and we're going to spray the whole thing with gloss, clear coat gloss, right? Then we're going to put when we've found our decals and we've checked that they are the right color, the right size, and the right font, otherwise the entire number's got to come off. We're going to then go and reapply them, okay? And we're going to use microsol and microset and get them on there nice, flat, no bubbles, looking beautiful, okay? Good luck with this, because I take my hat off to people that do this, because it's not an easy thing to do, right? So you've done that. Then you're going to want to get rid of the film around the decal, which you're going to try and cut as close to as you can. You're then going to do that, you're just going to spray the whole thing then with matte clear coat when you're finished. So you might well want to weather it before you do this, but you can spray it with a clear coat matte, then do your weathering. Actually, it doesn't really matter, but once you've done your weathering, you go over and give it a final matte finish, clear coat matte. Do that. The thing with numbers is remember where the numbers are. So numbers are not just on the sides of the cars, they're on the ends. But if you do get into renumbering and you've got a layout where you only ever see the train from one side and you don't want to see the same car, you could do the car different numbers on different sides. People do that. So it doesn't look like the same cars keep going through the layout, but you get in really... No one's reading the car numbers on the train as it goes past. Like, seriously, But yeah, I mean, you are going to get duplicate if you model a short line or an obscure railroad, you're going to get duplicates. Some people just don't care about that, but some people do. The other thing is if you're in HO as well, you can sometimes have a look to see whether the manufacturer does just a data-only car. So AccuRail, they make hoppers with just the data on the side, and you can do your own lettering and your own numbering on the side of your hopper. Now, when you really get into it and you're a few years into it, you may have heard of railroad prototype modelers. You may be a bit of a rivet counter. It catches up with everyone eventually. Eventually, everybody kind of starts setting themselves this standard of, I don't want to go back below that. And at some point, you're going to go, build dates are important, right? Now, if you're an N-scale modeler, because the N-scale community is kind of a bit ahead of it, you can get the build dates on your freight cars. On the boxes, it tells you the build date, right? Not on all HO, unfortunately, not yet. Wish it did, but it doesn't. But you want to change that build date, or you want to make that date it was last refurbished different. So it's not always the car numbers that you want to change. And one of the other key, really good details is when a car gets reweighed, sometimes they have to change some of that stencil data on the data sheet, and they'll cover it over. And now, if you're in more modern times, right, and you're a modern modeler and you've got an older car, you can patch it. So you would put a black box over the numbers or over the reporting marks and the numbers, and you would put your own lettering on, and you can re-letter it for whatever short line you want to do, or whatever class 1 because it's purchased. There was acquisitions and whatever over the time in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So you want to do that, and then you can do lots of different patch outs, and you can get right into it. So, but if you just want to take the numbers off and put new numbers on, T-cut.
Perfect. I guess that's covered all the basics. It's got a little bit of a stepping stone into building your skills within the hobby. Is there anything else you want to add, or do you want me to ask the final question I have?
You can ask the final question. Whether I'll answer it is a different thing, but you can ask it.
Okay. So we've been in the hobby now for a while. We've built our skills up. We're communicating with a local community, online possible. We've been to quite a few local shows. We're taking the step. We're going to the pinnacle of shows. We're heading to Amherst next year. How do I survive Amherst for my first trip? And as you know, it's a real life question. How do you survive Amherst? You just came back. What do I need to prepare myself for?
You can't fully prepare yourself for it. You've got to accept a few things with a show as big as Amherst, which is Springfield show, or the Amherst Railroad Hobby Show in January. It's 350,000 square foot. It's 8 acres. You've got 2 days. You ain't going to see everything. So number one thing is don't waste any time when you're at the show. Take food and water in with you. Number 2, make sure you've got a pair of shoes that you didn't buy last week. They need to be well broken in. No shame in having a second pair of socks, right? Number 3, if you see it and you want it, you're going to buy it. Because two issues. Someone else will buy it if you don't. And the second bigger issue is you may never find it again. As in, you may never find that table again, right, where it was. It is that big. So I made the boo-boo, and I've been going since 2017 to Amherst. I've only missed it when Joe Biden wouldn't let us in the country because of that COVID thing. But I've been every other time. The number one thing is everyone still makes mistakes each year. So I forgot to tell everyone and myself to make sure somebody got us some lunch on Saturday of this year, and then I ended up having some dire mac and something cheap. It was horrible. It was absolutely hanging. And there is some good concession stands, but you're going to waste 45 minutes to an hour queuing at lunchtime to get in there. So there's a grocery store just down the street. Go and get yourself a a sarnie and a bottle of pop and a bottle of soda and a bag of chips or crisps or whatever. Get it in your bag and make sure it's there. Also, have a second shopping bag for when you spend more money than you thought you were going to do. So in the pockets of my rucksack are separate tote bags, always, just in case. You can never not, always got to be a just in case. And but otherwise, prepare. Get your list of vendors, get your map printed off, highlight who you want to go and see, decide where you're starting, decide what you absolutely have to see. If you want to talk to somebody and get time to talk to them, remember that that's a Sunday afternoon adventure. Saturday is all about spending money. So that's pretty much it for big shows. Just prepare, plan. Nothing can prepare you for your first big show, though.
Perfect.
Nothing to fully prepare you for it.
I should sit down, look at last year's vendors, have a bit of a game plan, wait for the vendor list to come out, and start writing my mud map for where I'm going on day one.
Yeah, most people don't move at big shows like Amherst and the Rocky Mountain Train Show. They will move a little bit, so you need to check it before you go. But most don't move. Most people go in with the other thing is what most people go in with a shopping list. Prioritize the shopping list.
Okay.
That I absolutely want this item, that needs to be the first place that you go in. So if the absolute I want the item is in the Stroh building, then you're starting at the Stroh building. If it's in the Mallory, you're starting at the Mallory. If it's in the Better Living Centre, you and 80% of everyone else is starting there anyway. But, figure out where it is and make a beeline for it and get in there, get early and get it done. But it's it's a big show. There's a lot going on. Enjoy it. Don't forget you're there to enjoy it. If you can't get it, if you miss it, don't worry about it.
Yep.
Right? Just don't worry about it. Take cash with you. There is cash machines as well. There is ATMs, but they get refilled twice. But we're talking, you don't want to be doing anything.
Don't want to be queuing up for something. Yep.
Yeah, you don't want to be doing anything that's distracting you from the main goal, which is spend money, see layouts, and meet people.
Perfect. I look forward to it. I better start planning now. Gordy, we've got through the hour. Thanks, Jordan, for leaving us both in the deep end, and Martin for not being around to host. But I know we've all got other things to do. Last thing, Gordy, where does everyone find your podcast and listen to these short shows? I do it every morning. I check to see if something's come out in hope. Nothing's come out for a month, so I'm expecting really quickly. But where do we go to find it?
Well, if anyone wants to volunteer to help with some editing, then stuff will come out. But yeah, you can find it on. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Amazon Podcasts. It's on Spreaker, which is also where Around the Layout is. But if you go to gordy.uk, my website, you'll be able to find the podcast there. We also have a Facebook page, which we've not really promoted because we don't want to upset any other podcasters or anything like that. We just thought we'd just share some tips with people and some knowledge. We're not trying to steal anyone's idea or anything else that anyone else is trying to do. We're just trying to help people out. So you can also go find us on Facebook. But the best way to find us is go to your favorite podcasting app. We should be there. Otherwise, go to gordy.uk. You'll see around at the Workbench. Sorry, not around the layout. You'll see at the Workbench up there. Click on that, and it's all there. So knock yourselves out.
Perfect. Thanks, Gordy. I look forward to listening to the next show very shortly, hopefully. And we'll talk to you later. All right. So yeah, go enjoy your next meeting.
Next meeting starts in 4 minutes.
Perfect. Catch you later.
Well, this is Bob.
Hi everyone. That's going to be the end of the show for February/now March. We've had a few technical difficulties with the new system here. We'll be sorting these out in the next few days, and we'll be back with you guys on the 23rd of March with our normal show. Lloyd will be back with another Pillars of Scenery clinic, and we look forward to everyone joining then. So until later in the month, keep modeling. Talk to you later.
From the Bob Zenscale Man Cave. And if you're watching this channel and have not subscribed down below or ring that bell, you better do it now. I know you want to. Come on, just click it.